while. We've talked about doing
Mhm.
this a few times, and I'm excited that we finally made it happen. So
Yeah, for sure, man.
let's get right into it, man. I
Yeah.
don't want to ask too many. Just man, I feel like wrestling interviews. There's so many generic, over asked questions. It always starts with the same one. How'd you get
Yeah.
into wrestling? People want to hear that. They can watch all these other interviews. The one question I do want to start off with is
Yeah.
18 years? How long have you been in the business? How long have you been actively wrestling for?
Yeah. So I started 2004. So I'm 19, almost 19 years in now. But
Okay.
then with, missing a year and a half to COVID. And then, I always tell people the first 5 or 6 years, I didn't take wrestling very seriously. I was kind of like a weekend warrior. So, when people ask me how much experience I have, I usually say, 10, 12 years, something like that, instead of 19.
Right, right. One thing that I think is really, really interesting is how many countries you've wrestled in. And
Mhm.
that number is growing. It seems like every
Yep.
couple of years you're adding another one to your notch. How many countries have there been so far? So I know you're adding a couple new ones this year, I think, but how
Yep.
many is it right now?
Yeah, so I've been to 23 and I've either wrestled or I've trained in 17.
Okay.
And then the goal is by March to have hit 30 countries I've been to because I
Ooh.
should get another 7 or 8 here in just the next few weeks.
Right. Okay. What is the difference? Does each country have its own unique wrestling style? Are there any similarities? Obviously, it's wrestling, so there's going to be some similarities across the board, but have
Mhm.
you noticed any differences with wrestling styles in different countries, say Europe or South America or anything like that? What's really stuck
Yeah.
out as far as that stuff?
Yeah, with that many different places, I wouldn't say there's that many different styles of wrestling. I'd say there's, 3, 4 basic styles of wrestling. Like there's, more American style, or there's like English, like chain wrestling style, and there's, lucha libre. And then like Japan is kind of in a world unto itself. But
Sure.
I think that I think in general it's one of those like 3 or 4 styles. You just might be surprised by which one you get wherever you go. So like if you end up in a specific random country, I just might not know what to expect,
Right.
and then I'll just see what their style really is. Like obviously I've been to Spain a couple times, and that's been really great. And they're obviously they're very lucha, just like they would be in Mexico. But I wasn't sure if it would be like that because obviously they're so far away from Mexico.
Right.
Um, and I've been to other Spanish speaking places where that's not how they wrestle or anything like that. So it's always really interesting to me. But really, like if you're good at American style pro wrestling, you'll probably be okay anywhere you go. I like being able to change my style a little bit to match the place that I am. But yeah, there's usually not like too many huge differences. Or I like to talk to the wrestlers there and see how they work in a very specific way. Like in some places they work, very, very light and it's a lot of finesse. And then in other countries, it's very intense and it's very brutal, like everything they do. Even though you might see a show and they both look pretty similar, there might be a completely different culture around wrestling in one of them.
Hmm. What was the first country you wrestled in outside of the US? Did you keep it close with
Yeah.
Mexico and Canada, or did you go all the way out
Yeah.
to
So
Japan?
when I was really young, like a year or two in, I got to go to Canada a couple
Okay.
times. And then when I was 10 years in, the first place I got to go overseas was Norway. So
Ooh,
that was a pretty like obscure one, really.
right.
And
Yeah.
that one was because I was when I was younger, like middle and high school. I don't know, for some reason I was just obsessed with Norway, like
Oh,
just the country, and it just
right.
seemed like such a cool random place. And like kind of like that death metal culture and some stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
was like
Yeah.
really infatuated by going to
Sure.
Norway. So the first trip I ever took, I pretty much was just going to take like a vacation, and I picked a handful of countries I wanted to go to on my vacation, and then everywhere I was going, I just found all the wrestling companies and found wrestlers in each of those places. I just started messaging them, and then that
Okay.
ended up with my first show overseas being in Norway in 2014.
Oh,
Which funny enough, I didn't even get booked for that show until the night before because
really?
yeah, I had messaged them probably like 2 months ahead of time and said, "Hey, I'm going to be here. I saw you have a show on this Friday. or Saturday, whichever it was. I was like, hey, I will be there. I would love to be a part of your show. Here's my stuff. But part of wrestling is a lot of promoters don't ever watch your stuff. Like
Mhm.
half the time, they don't even read your messages. And as a guy who's promoted shows, like I understand that, so I can't be upset at them about that.
Right.
Um, because I was just a random guy with no name coming from overseas, and at the time, I didn't realize pretty much any European promotion is if you're an American trying to go over there, they're going to just assume that you won't make it over there. Like they just think there's no way you're going to show up. Uh,
That makes sense.
unless, yeah, unless like now I've been to Europe like 10 times. So now I have a reputation. Everyone knows I'm a man of my word and I'll be
Right.
there and everything. So like now I can get away with it, but I had never been anywhere before. So they obviously didn't think I was going to be there, and they probably didn't want to book me anyway. Because especially with smaller companies that don't run a lot, they have their guys are always going to use anyway, so they don't really need outsiders either.
Right.
And I wasn't going to help them draw more people, so I had been talking for a while, and the promoter was like kind of blowing me off, but I kept reiterating, I'm going to be there no matter what. I will be at the show. And
Right.
then maybe a week and a half before, I reached out to the champion of their company because a guy named Daniel, I mean, we were about the same age, and I messaged him and I was like, "Oh, hey man, I'm going to try to come to Norway. I'm going to spend a week there and whatnot." And I'd watch some of his matches, and then he'd watch some of my matches. And I guess the night before, uh, the group of people that helped book the show were all hanging out, and this dude Daniel brought my name. I was like, hey man, like this American's really good and he's gonna be here. We should figure out something.
Hmm.
And one of the other guys who was a wrestler on the show, but also part of the booking team, was like, well, hey guys, actually I have to work late anyway. So I'm not gonna make the show till 30 minutes or an hour after bell. He's like, so just give him my spot. He's like, obviously this dude's gonna be here. We should use him.
Right.
And then they got a hold of me right after that. So the night before, they messaged me, and I was at a hotel, and they're like, "Hey man, are you still gonna be at the show tomorrow?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll definitely be there." Like, great, we got a match for you. And I showed up, and I had this really terrible match, but I got on the show, so that's all that mattered.
So when it comes to wrestling internationally, do you have to speak the native language? Do you need to learn that at all to be able to work a match and work with the promoters and not always like call a match, but put it together?
Mhm.
Or
Yeah,
is there kind of an unspoken international understanding language when it comes to working a match?
yeah, yeah. Luckily, you don't have to speak the same language as anyone to have a great match. And even when I lived in Japan, I was in Japan for a decent amount of 2016 and 17,
Mhm.
and I was the only guy in my company that spoke English. Like none
Really?
of the other guys spoke English. A few guys spoke a little bit of broken
Right.
English, but I was the only one that did. And they never booked more than two foreigners at the same time. So when I was there, I never even had another person that I could communicate with that lived in the dojo or anything. And I had most of the best matches of my career in Japan with guys that don't speak any English. So it's kind of a universal language if you really understand pro wrestling. The
Right.
trouble is it takes so long to really understand it. Like you
Right.
have to know what to do when, and you have to be able to read the crowd and the vibe and the flow of the match to make it really, really good. And if you're in there with somebody else who understands that, it can be the easiest thing in the world. But it takes, I would say 5 or 10 years at least for people to really get an understanding of it. But no, pretty lucky. I don't have to know the languages of the places I'm going, which is great because even if I were to like on that trip to Norway, it's like, well, I had like learned a little bit of Norwegian,
Mhm.
but then I also went to Sweden and Denmark. Well, I could have concentrated all my time on trying to learn, one language or
Right.
like one or two phrases in three languages. Well, at the end of the day, I know neither of that's really going to help me too much anyway.
Right.
So it's like eventually now I've just got to the point where I try to pick up a couple phrases wherever I'm going, but I don't really worry too much about knowing the language.
Okay. Same thing with do a like leading a seminar because I know you've done a
Mhm.
couple of those internationally.
Yeah.
What point did you decide you wanted to start? Was it your idea to do international seminars? Did the
Mhm.
promoters ask you to do it since you were coming in already? And do you have a translator for you while you're leading those? Like that's got to be difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So international seminars are super interesting to me because I never know what the grasp of the language will be wherever I
Right.
am. And I don't know if they'll have anyone that can translate at all. I
Right.
always hope that they do. And a lot of my seminars, uh, I'm not doing a lot of physical in ring stuff. I'm usually trying to talk to them more. Like if I'm hosting a seminar with somebody, I want to teach the wrestlers about psychology and storytelling. I want to teach the wrestlers about a lot of the stuff up here that they don't understand because, if they have access to a training facility, hopefully they can train 2 to 4 times a week and they can learn the physical stuff because like learning a suplex isn't hard. I
Hmm.
mean, it's not easy necessarily, but learning a suplex isn't that hard. There's only a few ways to do one.
Right.
So I'm trying to teach them higher level thinking stuff. But sometimes I'll get there and realize, oh, this isn't going to work at all. Because and there's I actually it was my idea originally, and originally I came up with the idea to try to make more money while I was traveling because
Mhm.
a lot of the independents in Europe are just like the independents in the U.S. and they don't have a lot of extra money.
Right.
So if I'm coming over to wrestle, in Europe, a match for X amount of money, which isn't necessarily that much, well, I'm trying to think like, what else can I bring you that helps get me a little bit of money and it gives back to your company too. So, let's just say I'm just going to throw out random numbers, but let's say they say they can get me $200 for a match, but I can have a seminar. They have 10 students, and those 10 students can pay $20 for the seminar. Well, now all of a sudden I've got $400 instead of two.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why I started doing that. Um, and it took a minute because I had to build my reputation over there
Sure.
before I could leverage doing a seminar. So people had to know I was good before
Mhm.
they would book me to do it, which I think it was just smart. Like they shouldn't just
Yes.
let anybody do a seminar because there's a lot of people out there that are doing seminars and really shouldn't. Like
Yeah.
I see it all the time on
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram where I'm like, why
Yeah.
would they bring that
Yeah.
person in? Like,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Um, the last time, a couple times I've seen you go overseas, you've taken a couple people with you. I know recently you
yeah.
took Jack Vaughn, Aaron Williams with you
Mhm.
overseas. How obviously you weren't doing that from the beginning going over. At
Yeah.
what point did you decide, okay, maybe I take some people with me, and
Mhm.
how carefully do you pick who you take with you? Because reputation's everything. You take the wrong person and they mess up. Obviously,
Oh
anybody who
yeah.
knows Jack and Aaron knows that they're super professional.
Yeah.
Do the promoters ask you if you can bring anyone with you? Do you bring them along for the ride just as
Mhm.
traveling buddies? And yeah, like I said, like how difficult is the decision on who to take with you?
Yeah. It's very difficult. I think about it a lot. I wish I had $1 now for everyone that's asked if they could go with me.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a
Yeah.
ton of guys ask,
Yeah.
hey man, can I tag along with you? And there's a lot of reasons why I would say no to them. And I always hope that people are understanding when I tell them no,
Mhm.
because there's a lot that goes into it. So,
Yeah.
also with that, like I travel in the most bare bones way possible. So, like, I love staying at hostels, where you can get just a dorm bed for like $20 a night. In
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, maybe like $8 a night. It's like
Oh,
something real.
wow.
Yeah. So, like, I like traveling really cheap.
Mhm.
I don't really mind having to be a little spontaneous. So like I might not book my place to stay in certain locations. So if I can make friends at the wrestling company, well, I'm definitely going to ask them like, does anyone have a place I can crash to save a couple bucks?
Mhm.
Not everyone's going to want to travel like that. Not
Right.
everyone's going to feel confident in that. Also, I have to know if I'm taking other people with me, the chances of me being able to crash on someone's floor, they disintegrate pretty fast if there's two or three of us. So now I
Mhm.
have to realize, well, I probably have to book us a place to stay
Yeah.
because there's only so much floor space or any extra couches that certain people might have at their place. Like
Mhm.
I would let it's easy for me to let one person crash in my place, but
Yeah.
if three people want to crash, that's a little different.
Yep.
So I also have to be real tricky because they might not like the way I travel, and they might travel in a completely different way than I do too. Because
Mhm.
so one time, 2018 was the first time I ever took a friend of mine with me, and I won't mention his name, but we were going to go 30 days in Europe, and it was going to be like we land in England, then we go to Germany for a while, and then we are just going to bounce around a few other places. But we're going to have a home base in England, and then Northern Ireland was the end of the month, and we were going to come home. And my friend, I think he ended up, so we had an issue with our place to stay, so we ended up separated for the first handful of days.
Hmm.
Well, he didn't react very well to having to figure these things out,
Right.
and he only stayed, I think, like 8 or 10 days out of 30. Then he just bought a ticket and came home.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and like so we did, a show together in Germany, and then he went back to England because he had a place to stay there, but I didn't, and which was an issue that I thought we had covered before we left. It was the thing I'd left up to him actually,
Right.
and but he didn't really react well to it. And even then, when we were walking around in southern Germany one day, he was very much of the mindset of, oh, let's go grab McDonald's, or oh, let's go do this or that. But he was kind of saying things that were like very American.
Hmm.
And I'm like, nah, man, I'm not about that life. Like if I'm
Right.
here, I want to know the culture. Like I want to do
Hmm.
like walking tours. And I want to eat at very German restaurants, or I want to do
Yeah.
these kind of things. And not everybody is just like programmed for that.
Right.
Or one time when I was really that first trip, I went to Norway and Sweden and Denmark. I took a significant other with me at the time, and she was not about staying in hostels. Like it had to be a hotel, and
I've
you know,
stayed in a hostel in Chicago, and it's definitely not what people would maybe think it's like. And it's
mhm.
very, it's an experience, man.
Yeah,
It's, yeah,
for sure. And in
yeah.
Europe too, like granted, it's a much more European thing. I think Europeans deal with that kind of stuff much better than Americans probably would.
Yeah.
But like a hostel might be fantastic in Europe. I've only stayed in two or three that were a nightmare out of like probably 20 stays in hostels.
Mhm.
Um, but sometimes they're pretty grungy. Like one I stayed in, I saw drug deals and hookers working on the corner, yeah, like right outside my window.
Oh, wow.
And then yeah, so I got well, that's not for everybody. Like
Right.
it didn't
Right.
necessarily bother me. I'll admit
Mhm.
is well, I wore my hoodie to bed and I had my like fanny pack with my passport and money
Oh,
on
yeah.
me the whole time. Like to me, like that wasn't really that big of a deal because I paid $11 for the room.
Right.
But I can't say everyone would be like that. So I'm really careful with who I take with me. And luckily, Jack Vaughn and we've been friends since we were pretty much kids. We've
Mhm.
been pretty much on the same wavelength. We're not partiers. Like we're both straight edge dudes. So when we went in 2022 together, we did Finland, Estonia, and Sweden. And I knew like he and I would probably be fine. Like we've been on the road together enough for me to know like we'll probably be okay if we're all together, like overseas. And then when I talk to promoters, this is the hard part. It's really hard to get one person booked overseas, let
Yeah.
alone two or three, because promoters don't have unlimited budgets.
Right.
Bookers don't have unlimited budgets. So now what I pretty much say is I'll contact the promoters and bookers that love me the most, because there's a couple that just they love me, and
Mhm.
which I put in the work for. I earned that,
Right.
But
Yeah.
now, luckily, I can get a hold of those guys first and say, hey, I have this guy with me. You'll love him, and they'll be like, okay, cool, I'll give him a shot. And then they'll tell me, hey, man, this is what I can afford to pay you, which normally it's a little bit. They're going to probably make less than me because
Mhm.
they're going over to try to prove themselves.
Yeah.
And then, that trip we went, well, my buddy, the promoter in Finland, loved Jack. So now every time he hits me up about a show where he's got a sponsorship or a bigger budget, he hits me up on WhatsApp immediately. He's like, hey, man, in 3 months, I got this show. I'd love to use you and Jack. And now, I was able to get Jack in there. He loved him. And then now he'll hit up me asking, oh, hey, is Jack going to come with you too?
Nice.
And then on this last trip, I was like, you know what? Our buddy Aaron Williams had asked me if he could come with. I was like, you know what? Like, Aaron and I weren't super tight. We've just been acquaintances. And I was like, well, I think we'll be pretty good. And then kind of the same thing as we went over there. Well, Aaron's amazing. He's a great wrestler. He's a great dude. Like, there's just not a lot of people in the world that are as cool as Aaron Williams. And like, so after that, first show in, every single guy on the card. We were in Romania, in Transylvania, actually, and we were like backstage, and we're all watching each other's matches. And the locker room is full of all these European veterans. So
Mhm.
like you have this big veteran Kenzo Richards from the Netherlands, and then we have Tom LaRufa, who's a veteran from France, and then Starbuck, who's a veteran from Finland, and it's just like Ron Corvus, a veteran from Hungary. You have like all these dudes, a lot of them also are promoters, and they're just watching every match, and they've been hanging out with us anyway for the last 2 days because we're all there together in the same like hotel. Uh, and they're just watching like all of our matches, and then we're all hanging out after. And pretty much, there's nothing better than a big group of really good professional wrestlers that all know each other really good and have mutual respect. Like it's wild. So it's like we had like 9 or 10 different nationalities all hanging out, like Germans, Hungarians, Romanians, like Americans, Canadians, like Finns, like all hanging out, just mutual respect, just having a good time. And now, well, all three of us would never have any trouble getting booked in any of those locations because we went to that one show and did great. Everyone loved us. And now, they, if they wanted, could probably go over on their own even without me because they built up their
Right.
resume a little bit, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's really hard because like I would hate to travel with somebody and just not jive with the way they want to live their life at
Yeah.
all. Like I said, I want to do tours. I love going to coffee shops. Like I
Mhm.
love seeing historical stuff. I was a history major in college. Like there's a lot of very specific things I want to do that not a lot of people want to do because I
Right.
have some friends they'd want to go out to a different bar every night and party, and that's just not really me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got to be really careful with who I choose.
Yeah. Um, at what point did you decide to kind of enter the world of becoming a trainer and
Mm-hmm.
kind of showing a younger generation of wrestler kind of what you know and what you learned? At what point did you decide that you wanted to do that? And did you
Yeah,
want to do it initially?
actually, I didn't. Yeah, I actually didn't want to be a trainer. Yeah, I spent a long time convincing myself I'm not qualified to train people. And then I'm trying to think of what year. Let's see. Probably would have been 2018, I think. Was I met this dude. Actually, I might have met him in 2017, and he just kept bugging me. And he's like, "Hey, man, we live close. We went to the same college at different times. I didn't know him then." He's like, "Hey, we went to the same college. I really want you to train me. I want to get into wrestling. This and that." I was like, nah, I'm good, man. Like, I don't really want to train people, and I was concentrating on my career,
Right.
and I just thought I'm not really qualified, and I don't have a place. And the dude just wouldn't let it go. And then another dude at my gym, this personal trainer that I talked to every day, was a huge wrestling fan. And he also started just bugging me relentlessly. So all of a sudden, I have these two dudes. And at the time, they were both, I want to say, 24, 25, something like that. And like both good looking young dudes, athletic, like decently muscular guys. And they both seemed pretty cool. And I got to know them real well. And then after maybe 6 or 8 months, something like that, I was like, all right, well, I'll start training you guys, but
Right.
just you two. And this is going to be kind of like, I'm your mentor.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what to do. And then I made a couple calls and sent a couple messages. And I
Mhm.
found a buddy of mine who would let me use his training facility to break him in. So we found this, but that actually at the time, the Van Zants or Tom rather had a pretty nice building in Shelbyville,
Okay.
and they had the Salvation Army building, and the ring was set up all the time. And he was like, "Yeah, man, just come on down whenever and start using it." And I started training both those dudes, and then one dropped out after 3 sessions, and then I kept training the other guy, and then he disappeared off the face of the earth for like a year, and then eventually he came back around. And I kind of picked up training him where I left off, and then when I picked up training where I left off a few months later, I met two other guys who pretty much the same thing, just like kind of started begging me to train them, and before I knew it, I was a trainer.
Right. It is, and obviously I'm not ever gonna mention names, but obviously I've seen you train a lot of guys, and a lot of guys seen it in person. When did you realize you wanted to open up your own training school? Because
Yeah.
training people is one thing, but to actually run your own training
Mm-hmm.
school and facility and the dojo, that's got to be completely different. For one, you're putting a lot of yourself on the line, not just your
Oh yeah.
reputation, your financials, your schedule, your time,
Yep.
everything, and just hoping that it works out with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we ended up bouncing around a couple different places that we were training people because they lost that building, which is that's what happens in wrestling. You know, you find something good and then it just disappears.
Yeah.
So like we lost that building, we went to somewhere else, and then we had issues with that somewhere else, and then we ended up landing at WCWO, which was awesome. And that's where I trained the guys out of for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I loved it down there, and I loved all the people I trained. And it just kind of like it got to be to a point where I just had differences of opinions, with some of the other guys who were coaching, like leading coaching. And it wasn't a matter of me thinking like they're wrong. It was just like, oh, I have a different way I kind of want to teach.
Sure.
But I also had to be really careful, because if I saw a student that had a lot of potential, I wanted to go decently hard on them because I want to push them to be better.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I brought in a few of my students who were paying me, and then there were a lot of students there that were paying the other company, and I had to be really careful to not do anything that would lose them their students, or
Right.
lose them their paying customers too. Because
Mhm.
even before I jumped into having my own building, I knew like this is not cheap. Like this is expensive to like have the home and even just pay for the heat, especially in the winter in a building like that. So eventually I was like, well, I want to do this my way,
Mhm.
and kind of like a my way or the highway thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't out of spite. It was just like, nah, man, I want to be focused. I want to tell them exactly what to do from the get go. And I'd gotten to so many other people that had reached out to me at some point about training, where I was like, well, you know what? I think, I could make this dollar amount work for rent. And I think I could probably get, a ring for X amount of money. And so I just jumped in. And November of 2022 is when I first started my lease on the new building. So we just signed our lease for the second year. And
Nice.
yeah, now it's
That's awesome.
it's all hands on deck. And it's been tough because obviously I didn't come out in the positive on year one. Like I'm still
Right.
a decent amount in the negative. Um, but I'm hoping that by the end of year two, we're looking pretty even. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's a tough racket to try to make money doing, um,
Yeah.
and to put it all on the line for it. But I have some great students, and
Mhm.
it's pretty rewarding being the coach. And I feel like I've got a kind of a knack for it.
Yeah.
And a lot of important people have kind of let me know like, hey, I think you have a knack for this. And we've had a lot of really good guests that have come into the dojo and given me feedback and everything like that. And pretty much they keep saying like, hey, we think you're doing things the right way, so
Mhm.
keep it up,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
I've seen a lot. I mean, I've obviously seen a lot of the guys that you've trained
Hmm.
and worked with, and yeah, it's just they're on a completely different level, and you can tell like they went through some. I've seen your training sessions, and they're not easy at all.
Hmm.
How hard is your training compared to what you went through? Because when you started training, for one, a completely different time,
Yeah.
which is hard to think that 2004 was that long ago, but man, the I guess we can call them the kids coming up now are completely different than
Okay.
our I guess our generation. Can we say that? Are we old enough
Well,
to say that now?
yeah, we are. Unfortunately, in wrestling, we are. Like since 2004, like the independents have seen one or two whole new generations of talent. In the time I've come along, there was the next huge generation of talent that came in, and then they're already gone. I've been replaced by the other next generation talent. Like there's a 5 or 10 year turnover on the independents, really, as far as the talent goes. And most people's career lasts 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
So in the time I've started, almost 20 years now, the turnover I've seen is crazy. And I'll be honest, I think that my training is soft. Like I think it's really soft.
You've told me
Um,
that before.
yeah, which I hate to say, because it's my training, and I lead it and I control it. But it's really soft. In 2004, I started a school that wasn't very good. But every day they just beat the hell out of me. They didn't want me to come back. I paid them all in cash up front. And I
Mhm.
very much know, well, they were just trying to beat the hell out of me. So I didn't come back and slow them down, and they could keep my money. But I thought, I'd seen a shoot interview with Raven, and he pretty much said, if you're not ready to go in 6 months, then this isn't for you. And I was like, well, I can survive 6 months of this. I was
Right.
like, yeah, I can get hazed and bullied for 6 months. And when I was a kid, I was unathletic and I quit everything I ever started. I walked out of my like sixth grade football practice in like the first 30 minutes, or
Oh
something,
wow.
something like that. And I might have in seventh grade or something, but like I was like,
Yeah.
dude, no, I've quit a lot of stuff in my life. And this is the only thing I really want to do. So it's like I can make it 6 months of torture. And then like 4 months later or something, they were like, oh, well, I showed up at a show and they're like, well, your first match is today.
Oh,
I was like, oh, all right. So that was it. And then I went to Shark Boys training school like a year and a half later, and that was like nothing really because he had a handful of advanced guys, a handful of guys who'd never wrestled before, and then a lot of in betweens. So it was only 6 weeks. He only really taught the new guys how to bump, but that was it.
gotcha.
Um, yeah, then Jimmy Yang kind of took me under his wing, made me kind of his protege. But Jimmy's stuff training wasn't really physical; it was just psychology and telling me when to do stuff. And then in Japan, like compared to the training every day in Japan, like what I do is nothing because
Right.
the training in Japan every day is brutal. It's you have 2 sessions a day. You have a 3 hour in ring session. Then you have a 1 to 2.5 hour like weight room session. So like they make you put in the work. Like you have to do tons of work. And that's where I was really proud of my first 3 students, especially Blake, Logan, and Dutch, because I told them, I was like, if you can't do 500 unbroken squats, which is kind of like the symbol in Japan that you're well conditioned, then like I'm not gonna let you start. I'm not gonna
Oh,
let you have a
wow.
match. I was like, I need to see you at least do it before you have your first match. And I still remember I was working out with Dutch a little bit at the time, and after I told him that, within 5 or 6 weeks, we were both knocking out at least 500 squats before every lifting workout. And he was just right there, and we just drop into it together, right there in the middle of Planet Fitness. And I was like, oh, well, cool. You did it. like,
Right.
and then same thing with the other 2 guys. It was like, hey, you need to be able to do this. Otherwise, like you're going to show me you're not conditioned, you're not ready for it because it's as it's as hard mentally as it is physically to do a lot of the stuff they demand of you over there. But
Hmm.
yeah, they'll torture you, and even for your
How similar is that to like what you talked about with your original train? That sounds very similar, where like they just beat the crap out of you.
yeah
Maybe back then it was like we don't want you to come back, but in Japan, is it more like we're gonna do this to see if you are going to come back?
yeah it even though in Japan it was much harder and there were days where they kind of stretched you and really beat you up, I never felt like it was a go away thing. It was a we're going to break you and then we're going to
Mhm.
see if you give up kind of thing. So in Japan it always had a much more positive connotation to me,
Okay.
so it never came off negative. Now the first month I was there for just a month of working out in the dojo, and they did like treat me terribly and like didn't say anything in English unless it was profanity toward me, and yeah, that was kind of rough. But I still never felt like it was the goal was to get me just to leave. The
Mhm.
goal was just to break me down a little bit and to build me back up. Um, so I feel like the place I started in Marion in 2004, it was just kind of like a lot of redneck dudes that finally have someone they can beat up that can't do a lot back to them, that kind of thing.
Right. We're gonna teach this kid, you
Yeah,
know. Gotcha. Um, how long has White River Wrestling really like legitimately been a promotion? Because you don't just wrestle on your own. You don't
yeah,
just run a school. You're also a promoter as well,
mhm.
you
Yeah.
know?
We had our first show in 2013, so
Okay.
September 21st, 2013. So we've technically been having live events for 10 years. We do 2 to 4 shows a year, though. It's not much.
Right. Right.
So, and a lot of that's just because without having a school and without having students, I had to do almost all of the work as far as promotion. So now I actually have a lot of students where now I can divvy up and teach
Mhm.
them like, hey, here's how you promote, here's how you fly, or here's how you sell tickets. And the last show, I put in the least amount of work I've ever put in personally on a show. I still put in work, but like
Right.
I put in the least amount I ever had, and we had pretty much a sellout crowd in our
Mhm.
debut at a new building. So that let me know, well, it's nice to have 8 to 10 students who are out there doing
Yeah.
some kind of work for you.
Yeah. Um, I've seen you at your shows. It's just stressed, just beyond belief.
Yeah.
What what are some of the things that go into booking a show, promoting a show that fans maybe don't realize is even a
Mm-hmm.
thing, or even you didn't realize either was either going to be a thing or was is harder
Yeah.
than you thought it would be? I mean, obviously the whole thing is hard, but
Yeah.
what is that like?
You know, there's so much. Like even in like designing a flyer and working with a graphic designer and artist to come up with the right flyer is tricky, or finding the right talent for your show is tricky. And then you're putting matches together. Matchmaking is really tricky. Um, I try to tell the guys all the time, just because there's two really good wrestlers doesn't mean they're going to have a really good match.
Yeah.
Sometimes the two best wrestlers in the world can have a terrible match
Mhm.
if you just don't understand why this would be good or wouldn't. So there's so many things that go into it. Or I stress that, like, hey, if I'm going to put someone on a flyer, well, they have to be physically appealing. They have to look really really good, because like I'm drawing casual fans.
Mhm.
The very like niche crowd of wrestling fans in Indianapolis are going to come to all the shows no matter what. So like
Mhm.
we're not trying to draw those fans. They'll be there. We're
Yeah.
thankful for them. Like
Yeah.
they'll be there thankfully. So like I'm not really appealing to those fans because they'll come and appreciate the show anyway. But it's like if I'm going to get a casual fan to come in and give us a chance, well, I have to give them something. Like I
Mhm.
have to give them people who look like superhumans. Like I have
Yeah.
to give them great talent. I have to give them all these like checked boxes. Um, so that's kind of tricky. Or even like going to local businesses in the area to promote and ask people to hang flyers. Like it's really hard to walk into someone's business and cold just ask them, "Hey, can you put up this flyer for this show?" Because
Mhm.
most of the time they're going to say no, and they're going to say it in a very decisive, kind of rude way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Granted, it depends on the part of town you're in. Fountain Square people are going to help you out a lot more than Carmel, Indiana people, because they want to support local stuff. But
Mhm.
there's so much behind the scenes that people don't even think about, or production. Production, like finding the right like production people or setting up the room in a way that's more aesthetically pleasing, making sure the seats are all lined up in a straight order, like making sure things don't get turned around last second. Um, yeah, there's so much. Yeah, luckily, but the last show we did was probably the least stressed I've ever been, because I had so many people divvying up all the important things.
Right.
Yeah, so stressful. Also, reason why I don't run too many shows.
This is true. And you've the guys that you have on your shows, your quote unquote White River roster,
Mhm.
you've gotten guys that are reliable. They're gonna, for
Yep.
one, they're gonna show up, they're gonna put in the work, have a good match. But yeah, you are like, how important do you feel like the appearance of a wrestler is just kind of not as stressed or as important as it maybe was 20 years ago, 10 years ago? Like you,
Yeah.
you hear a lot of the veterans on the major levels say like you've got to look like a star. Like you've got
Oh yeah.
to carry yourself like a star. Like Joe Schmo in the front row doesn't necessarily want to see somebody that looks just like them on the show. They want
Yeah.
to see somebody that looks like they're somebody, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. In the last generation or two of wrestlers, it's become a game where there's way too many schools and there's way too many people jumping into wrestling. And there's way too many people booking guys that shouldn't be in the ring yet. And with that comes people who don't take their physique seriously or don't really care that much. And they think, well, if I'm just talented in the ring, it doesn't matter what I look like. Well, no, it matters. It honestly, it matters more than your talent. Your look matters so much more than your talent does. So make sure
Mhm.
you have both. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's not nearly as stressed as it used to be, and that's sad because there's plenty of talented in ring technicians out there. But if you don't
Mhm.
look good, like I can't take you seriously, you're also not going to sell me a ticket.
Right.
There's a couple indie guys in the area that are very good, um, from what they do in the ring, but they'll never sell a ticket. You just can't. I would never pay to see them. Even me, I would be like, they don't mean anything to me. Like they don't look tough, they're probably not tough. Also, now since those couple generations of changeover, like when I started in 2004, all the guys actually were tough. Like you had to
Mhm.
be, because to get into
Yes.
the business, you had to go through what I did, which was the constant beatings and hazings. Um, the guys trying to like pull your girl after the show, like you had to go through
Right.
a lot of crap, and that
Mhm.
made you tough. Like
Mhm.
I'm not a guy who says, "Oh yeah, let's fight." I think fighting for free is kind of stupid. Like that's kind of what I say. I say it at bars too when guys try to start stuff, because that happens all the time. I'm like, bro, I don't fight for free. Like that's dumb. But when I was young, like 2004, 2005, there were a handful of times I had to tell people like, hey man, all right, well, just step outside and let's settle this now. Like,
Right.
let's figure this out now. Or, at bars, well, if the dude took a swing at me, well, I have to do something about it now. Um, so, back then, like all the guys were pretty tough. Um, so, a lot of the dudes now aren't so tough. They had cell phones when they were young, and they kind of grew up more on YouTube than they did outside in the real
Oh
world,
God.
seeing
Yeah.
how things were actually done.
Yep.
Um, and granted, there are some habits now that a lot of the younger people have that are better. Like not as many of them have bad, pill addictions or some certain stuff like that, and that's positive,
Mhm.
sure.
Right.
But a lot of the guys back then were tough. Then the next generation of guys came trying to copy them, but without some of the toughness and the edge.
Mhm.
Then people came along and tried to copy those guys. Well, now you've copied a copy, and
Right.
now what you're left with is kind of like an outline, like the stencil of what kind of made a wrestler, right? And
Yeah.
and honestly, you can't argue against it. Like you can't say the indies are good because quantifiably, like looking at numbers and ratings and money, wrestling's never really been less popular.
Mhm.
Wrestling is the WWE's numbers are good, but compare WWE's numbers today to WWE's numbers from 1997 to 2002.
Nothing close.
Yeah, like so
Yes.
compare the numbers today to the numbers then. Business for them is great technically right now because of how they were the last 10 years. Sure. However, you can't argue that the business is better off now than it used to be. Yeah, like it's worse, and the indies are worse now than they used to be,
Mhm.
and that's because people are trying to copy copies now.
What do you think is the most important to putting together a good match and making a match great? The moves, the psychology. Obviously, the story is the most important, but the moves, the
Mhm.
psychology, the promo, what really gives it that total package that makes it good in your eyes
Yeah.
as a promoter, as a veteran,
Mhm.
all that.
Yeah, it's all about the story. I always say story and psychology are to me the same thing. So to me, it's all about the story. Like, how can you get the people emotionally invested in what you do?
Mhm.
I don't care what you do to make that happen. Is it your promo before the match? Is it your entrance? Is it the first 30 seconds of the match? Um, it doesn't matter. Like whatever you can do to get people involved, that's what matters. If it's giving your sunglasses to the kid in the front row at the very beginning, well, that's going to get you a lot further than probably a top rope Hurricane Rana will.
Mhm.
Um, the uh, the moves are irrelevant. The moves are just a device you use to get to the end of your story. Um, and they have nothing to do with the quality of the match. So whenever people discuss matches and they're talking about moves, well, they're already way off base. You know,
Right.
you shouldn't be talking about moves. You should only talk about moves in as much as, well, hey, we're going to tell the story using these moves as our device. That advances our story. We're not focusing on the moves. So yeah, I mean that's what makes a good match is just the story. You know, Taker and Michaels from WrestleMania 25, they did some great stuff, but people don't really remember the spots of that match.
Mhm.
Or like Flair and Michaels and Flair's like quote unquote retirement match at Mania.
Yep.
Well, it doesn't matter what moves they did. The only thing they remember was Sean mouthing "I'm sorry." That's
Right.
it. That's the only part people remember. Um, Honestly, if everyone didn't know Sean's finish was the super kick, you could probably have even asked people what happened after he said "I'm sorry," and people might be like, "Oh, I don't know."
Right.
But they just know because Shawn Michaels would have done the super kick.
Mhm.
And even then, so the moves don't matter at all, which is um, really apparent in the fact that so many indies, these guys do every single move, and the crowd doesn't do anything.
Yep.
The crowd doesn't care at all. But if you're telling a really, really good story and then you just happen to do a cool move, well, they'll probably react for you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, the moves don't matter. It's no one's ever like won a Pulitzer on a bad overall story, and the moves are just words. So
Right.
like
Yeah.
your word choices don't really matter, um, as long as you can somehow tell the story efficiently and elicit certain types of emotion. The words are just a thing that you have to use, because if you want to write a book, if you want to write a news piece, well, you probably have to use words. Um, it's the same thing. Like if we're having a wrestling match, well, yeah, you kind of just have to use moves. The
Mhm.
ones you choose don't really matter. Just put them in the right place.
Right. And kind of touching on that same subject, do you feel like there's a difference between telling a story overall and telling a story inside the ring, inside of a match? And do you feel like some guys on the indie level forget how to tell a story inside their match and make their match itself a story? Because so many
Mm-hmm.
matches I feel like now are just like a video game highlight reel, like
Yeah.
stunt scene,
Yep.
but you don't necessarily. I feel like a lot of guys come back through a curtain and you ask them, what story did you just tell? Uh, one on one, somebody won, somebody lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I agree. A lot of people even can take a part, like a decent part of the story, go in there, and then from bell to bell, they don't advance the story at all.
Mhm.
They just do what they thought was cool, or what they saw someone else do that they want to mimic. That's the big thing, is people are like, well, I saw Will Ospreay and Mike Bailey do this spot, so I want to do this spot. Well, those guys are the best at doing spots. You're never going to look better than them. So why would you even try to do what they just did? Because you can't look better. And it's not going to make anyone watch you if you
Mhm.
do something crazy, unless you do it the best that anyone's ever seen. There's not really a lot of new stuff left to invent. So like you're not going to really make waves with any moves. Um, yeah, so I mean, guys, they just need to be worried about the entire story, bell to bell, and what they're doing. And also, they need to realize sometimes like the best thing for the story might be 3 minutes, and then someone runs away and gets counted out. You know, that
Yeah.
could be best for your story, even though you
Mhm.
really want to go 15 minutes
Right.
and do 10 like
Mhm.
springboard maneuvers. Well, the
Right.
best thing for your story might be that you run away like a chicken after about 90 seconds, and
Mhm.
you should, like that's the important thing to do.
Right. Or, God forbid the star of the match loses, like I feel like that sometimes gets lost along the way too. Is like fans, I think, like Becky Lynch just lost to Nia
Mm-hmm.
Jax on Monday Night Raw, and so many fans are like, I can't believe she lost a match. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the story's just starting. And I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
fans want, certain wrestlers should not lose because of who they
Mhm.
are. And I feel like sometimes that gets forgotten a lot too, you
Oh
know.
yeah. Well,
Um,
now too, and so much of the world is based around instant gratification.
mm,
So like people want something, they want it now.
right.
People want to know a fact and they can Google it immediately. Or if people want to buy something, they can Amazon Prime it and have it by tomorrow. Like it's, I can stream whatever I want on Netflix or whatever. So like it's all about instant gratification, which makes it harder sometimes to tell a long lasting story. But if you want to really appreciate the story, it takes time. You
Right.
know, it takes a lot of time. Like people now say, well, there's no way that the crowd can be invested in a 45-minute match or a 60-minute match anymore. No, they could. The
Mhm.
guys in the ring just aren't doing a great job
Right.
at pulling you into it. Like it could still totally be done.
Mhm. It was just done last fall with Danielson and MJF in a 60-minute
Yep.
Iron Man match, and people are saying it's
100%.
one of the best matches they've seen, and it was 60 minutes. You
Yeah.
know, how much pride do you take and how proud of it? How proud are you of the fact that the majority of your White River shows sell as well as they do and sell well without having to rely on a quote unquote name to come
Yeah.
in? And, it's all Indianapolis local level or just local level guys, and it
Hmm.
sells and guys connect and the matches are good and fans don't just show up, but they come back.
Yeah. Oh, I'm super proud of that. Yeah, I'm super proud of that. It just personally, it means I'm doing the right thing booking wise, matchmaking wise. I'm doing the right thing. And financially, too, it also means I'm probably saving a lot of money because I don't have to buy flights and I don't have to buy hotels, which I bought a few flights and hotels before, but I'd rather not because that stuff adds up really quickly.
Mhm.
And I want my students and I want the local talent to be a reason people come to the show. Whether it's their friend or family or just a guy they talked to when they went to hang up a flyer in the bar. Like, I want that personal touch. If I can sell out a house with, if I can sell out a house of, 200 people with zero names on the show, well, then I have no like necessity to bring in a name because now I'm just going to lose a lot of money for the same draw.
Hmm.
So there's no reason for me really to bring in names. I would probably if I had like a very very big venue and it was just everything worked correctly, I would do it. Pardon me, but I'd much rather not because I want my kids to work on making themselves valuable to a promoter now. Or I want, my local Midwest talent type of guys to make themselves valuable to us. And I want to separate us too from all the other companies. That's why
Hmm.
on my shows you'll see a handful of guys that you don't really see on other local shows. Um, Now I might have to pay them a good amount of money, but to me that's worth it if they give me that amount of value.
Hmm. And also, a lot of the guys you have on your shows aren't necessarily working every other Indiana promotion within a 30-minute drive, where you see certain wrestlers on, 10 different shows in the same month, and they're all so close to each other, and fans have
Mhm.
seen them so many times. Like, you may not necessarily, if you don't know where to look, you may not see Ace Perry on another show relatively soon in this area. You may, Dutch Platinum isn't really wrestling full time in a bunch of different places right now, but he's on your show.
Yep.
And I feel like that helps out as well.
Oh, for sure. You have to make it special. Like nowadays I choose quality over quantity with my bookings. Well, if someone
Hmm.
wants to watch me wrestle, I want to tell them, oh, the only time you're going to see me the next 4 or 5 months is like if you want to see me wrestle, this is the only place you're going to do it.
Hmm.
So then they have to do it. If they want to see me wrestle, they have to make that show.
Yep.
And if you're really, really good at what you do, you don't want to oversaturate yourself in any market anyway. If I'm wrestling Cleveland and Grand Rapids and Louisville, and then Indianapolis once every few months, that's really, really good because I'm not oversaturating myself in any particular market.
Yep.
Then if I bring in a guy from Grand Rapids and then I bring in a guy from Louisville and then I bring in a guy from Cleveland, well, now I have a little bit of all those shows on mine. It's completely unique. Where if you're content working only one or two local shows or doing every show within a 50-mile radius of Indianapolis, you're not getting your name out there that much. And you're not going to be really special to the crowd. They might really like you and they might still come to see you. But if they know that they can see you next week too, it's not really quite as special.
Yeah. And I feel like so many like smaller local promotions either pay not at all or very little. And so I feel like a
Uh,
lot of guys are just beating up their bodies for little to no gratification in the end, for little
yeah.
to no reward. And it makes it tough because then fans see you so much, and it makes it tough. I wanted to bring up a kind of an off topic or off
Yeah.
subject topic. You and I have a very common interest. We both like early 2000s heavy metal, new metal, all
Oh,
that
yeah.
stuff. When I told you I was at a, what was it, Static X and Dope concert, you were like, "Oh my God, what is it about that era of music that you love so much?" I didn't even know you were into hard rock heavy metal until
Mm-hmm.
one of your shows. I'm like, "This music is awesome." And Brian's like, "Yeah, he likes all that stuff." I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it was probably because that was like my middle school and high school days, where I don't know, I just was into that. And it was probably that, teen angst. And, I
Right.
went to Ozfest like 2001,
Oh,
maybe, or Ozfest 2000 when I was like 13 years old or something like that. And, um, my one of my cousins had gotten me into like Slipknot right when the self-titled album came out,
oh,
and it was like the new stages of the internet too. So I was like,
yeah,
I have to know everything about them, and then I searched for everything related to that type of music, kind of like how I did with wrestling. I was like, well, I got to
right.
find out everything now, and and they just kind of went from there. And there's like a couple bands I just really gravitated toward, and then I found the other guys and gals I knew around me that liked that type of stuff, and it was just no turning back from that. And then
Right.
I hit up every concert I could ever go to from 13 to 17, like when I got into wrestling. And even
Hmm.
since then, still tons of concerts when I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I was, Mudvayne was like my favorite band for a long time. I was always
Yeah.
really into Static X, System of a Down, Slipknot,
Mhm.
Mushroom Head, yeah, Dope. Those
Yes.
bands were, a lot of my favorites for years.
Yeah. I remember I ran into you. I think it was at Alice in Chains a year or two ago, I think.
Yeah,
And I was
that's
like,
right.
Jake's here. That's crazy.
Hmm.
So that was just really, really cool. What is one of the biggest lessons you've learned? Because I mean, you've worked a lot of names. You've worked some bigger names over the last, 17, 18 years. I've
Hmm.
heard you tell some stories, but like what are some of the lessons that you've learned and taken away that you've been able to really just observe in the way other people have carried themselves and done business and worked with you?
Yeah, let me think. There's so many. It's tough to narrow down just one or two. Yeah, one thing I will say, um, working with some of like the bigger name people I've worked with over the last, especially 4 or 5 years, has built up my confidence a lot because sometimes I'll realize, oh, just because this is a former WWE name person, it doesn't necessarily mean they're better than me.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean they have a better mind than me or they know what they're doing more than I do. I worked with about 4 years ago. Uh, I worked with former WWE name at the Squared Circle Expo, and as I was calling the match with him, I realized like, oh man, you don't know what you're doing. Like you have no idea how a match goes. And I'm like, man, how are you a former WWE tag team champion? Like, how are you in this position? Wasn't Matt Cardona, just for the record.
I
Uh,
didn't think it was.
no, it wasn't Matt Cardona. And
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's mind blowing. Or like even, and this is kind of breaking the fourth wall. A year ago, I worked Matt Cardona, and they pretty much, the promoter pretty much said, here's the place we need to get to. We need to involve these like 7 people in the finish. And it was
Oh,
insanity.
that's a lot.
Like, yeah, it was so much stuff because it was like we each had a manager, but then we had to introduce his other manager, and then we are going to bump 2 refs. And it was
There's not a
all
lot
of
of
these,
room to work with in there either in that room. Like
dude,
it's not
it,
big.
it was a lot. And I was like, oh man. And I'm listening to, 2 different people, Matt and then the promoter talk about ideas. And I was like, hey guys, do you mind if I just talk out loud for a minute? I was like, I'm just going to talk out loud. Let me know what you're thinking. They're like, okay. And I just rattled off like 5 minutes worth of stuff. And then Matt looks at me, wow, yeah, let's do that. I'm like, oh, great. And that, obviously he knows what he's doing more than maybe
Yeah.
about anything out there. Like that dude, he gets it like on so many levels, like merchandising, marketing, like in ring, storytelling. Like that dude, he really gets it.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes I'll work with these guys who are great, and they'll tell me like, "Oh, dang man, that was great," or like, "Man, you just had a better idea than I did." Sometimes, or I'll work with certain other former WWE guys, and they have no idea what they're doing. Or like, I was on AEW Dark one time, and I'm talking to this guy about a spot, and he says an idea that made no sense. And I'm like, well, hey man, you could switch it to this and this, and then that would actually make sense. And he got kind of huffy with me. And I was like, well, hey man, that's cool. Like we can do it your way. That's wrong though. I was like, it looks stupid. But we can do it your way because you're the contracted talent. I'm not. And then he got kind of snippy and walked away. And then came back 5 minutes later and then was like, hey man, I think I'll change it. We're going to do this and this instead. And then of course he said my idea. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And probably smart. But it lets me know, well, just because that dude's contracted doesn't mean he's necessarily
Right.
better.
Right.
And no disrespect. Um, that's no disrespect to him. It's just a statement of fact where,
Right.
well, I should probably have confidence in myself because I've proven myself and I have, my resume to back it up and everything.
Right.
So, that's some stuff I've learned from those guys. I've also learned um, a lot over the last couple of years, which is something I teach my students now to be humble, but also to still walk around with a certain amount of confidence and arrogance.
Mhm.
Like not over the top, not disrespectful, but walk into a room like you should be there. Like you deserve to be there. You are good enough to be there. Because a lot of the people I'm turning out on the independents now, well, they're better than most of the locker rooms already in. So like I want them to walk in there and I want them to go show what they can do. I want them to be in main storylines right away. Like I want them being respected from the get-go because hey, I'm not going to let you out onto shows if I don't think you are so good.
Mhm.
Um, so there definitely is something to learn from walking into a room, being confident in your abilities. Whereas when I was young, I went way out of my way to stay very humble and quiet and stay into a corner. Well, now, no, I want my people going up to promoters and bookers and saying, "Hey, man, I got this idea. We could do this and this." Or, "Hey, man, I know you have this tonight. That's great. I'll do whatever you want. However, I think we could build to this and make this very cool." To teach them
Mhm.
to be confident, even if they get shot down, to be those people that are pitching ideas and trying to make the promoter's life easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you just said it. You used to not necessarily want to do that. I've also listened to your podcast. I've heard you tell stories about dealing with promoters, especially like the shady ones that very either very stubborn or don't want to pay the boy. How many years
Yep.
did it take you to get to the point where you were confident and comfortable enough to be that assertive to really either get your point across, get what you knew was right, or just get what you knew was ethically the right thing to have happen with you at that show? Because it's not easy to do that in a wrestling show backstage with a promoter because
No.
yeah, it's you risk a lot doing that sometimes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Every time that this could work out well for you, it could work out very poorly for you.
They all talk.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I didn't feel this way until the last 2 or 3 years. I didn't get to
Really?
this point till the last couple of years, and now I feel like I wasted a lot of time because it took me so long to get to this point. And now, well, I don't have anything to lose. I don't have anything to lose. I only have stuff to gain. So if I piss off a promoter now, and they don't want to use me. That's fine. I don't need them.
Right.
Um, I know realistically what my possible job opportunities left in the business are and how minimal they are for something I want to do. So like, it doesn't really bother me now if I frustrate a promoter. Um, Also, like, if I'm going to be honest with them and truthful to them, and if they realize I know what I'm talking about, then they'll respect me for it anyway. Yeah, I didn't get that type of confidence the last couple of years.
Gotcha. What is to kind of wrap it up and get back full
Mhm.
circle? What are the next couple countries you're going to? Because you're going overseas
Oh yeah,
next very,
yeah,
very soon.
yeah. 2 weeks. Yeah, I leave on the 30th,
Oh
and
wow. Okay.
yeah, I leave on the 30th. I'm gonna go to Croatia for a day or two, and then I'm going to Malta, and I'm gonna do a show for Pro Wrestling Malta on Saturday
Okay.
the 3rd, and then on Monday the 5th, I'm doing a seminar at the Pro Wrestling Malta School. And to my knowledge, all of their guys speak English, which will be very nice. Uh, and then I'll chill out there for a couple days and come home. And then at the end of February, beginning of March, I'm going to Italy and Greece and the Czech Republic, and I'll be doing a seminar in Rome, in Italy, and then doing something else with the promoter in Greece, and then trying to figure out some other stuff to do while I'm over there.
Nice. And then
Mm-hmm.
if people want to connect with you,
Mm-hmm.
see what you've done, where you're at, what you're doing, where can they find that at? And also, people, if anybody wants to try out and dip their feet in the pool, see what this is all about, set up a meeting with you to become a
Yep.
wrestler or start training, how can they find the White River Dojo and get
Mm-hmm.
connected with all of that?
Yeah, I'm at Jake Omen 2012 on everything, and then at White River Wrestling on everything. It's also White River Wrestling at gmail.com. They can hit me up a DM to either of those two or to that email. Just let me know if you want to jump in. And then, yeah, I'll post all the stuff I've got going on. Hopefully, we'll have a lot more shows for White River Wrestling here in 2024. We're
Right.
working on trying to get a monthly show at one specific venue. So if we can do that, then anyone who's curious about what we do can come check it out and see a couple of live events. Even at the last event we had just a couple of weeks ago, at intermission, I had 3 kids come up to me who are all 19 and just they couldn't shut up about we have to train with you now because I'd had
Nice.
the announcers, say, hey, we have a school and a lot of the students are helping out tonight. And a lot of the students are on the show tonight.
Mhm.
So there were only 4 matches into the show, and these 3 guys were like, we want to do this. And I think they're probably going to start in February now.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, at Jack Owen 2012 and at Wire Wrestling are the easy ways to get hold of me.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was when I was working a show at somewhere, I can't remember. Somebody walked up to me like, "Hey, I'm about to start training to be a wrestler." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Where?" They're like, "White River up in Fishers." I'm like, "With Jake?" They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome. It's gonna be great." So yeah, it's getting out there. People are finding it. So, um, fans that watch the video, make sure you go to those places, hit up Jake, see what it's like to become a wrestler. And also, man, thank you for doing this and taking time to do this with me. We've been wanting to do
Yeah,
this for a
sure.
few years now, so I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, this is great, man. I appreciate it.